Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we continue topic on medical instrumentation and devices. This chapter mainly regarding designing of instrumentation system. So let's look at the introduction. Instrumentation, the use of measuring instrument to monitor and control a process. So if you want to monitor a process, then you need to have a small sort of instrument that can measure the variables, the properties, or whatever is the process happening. It's an art and science of measurement, control of process variable within a production laboratory or manufacturing area, right? When you combine the instrumentation with the biomedical field, then it's become an interesting instrument. Is the field of creating such instrument that help us to measure, record and transmit data to or from the body. That means it will involve in humans or animals. That means that we are recording the signals transmitted or received from the body, and it is essential so that we have this sort of measurement devices in the medical laboratory. There should be no confusion with these two terms, equipment and instrument. All instruments are equipment, but all equipment is not instrument. We'll look at a few examples later on. In biomedical instrument, measurements are divided into two categories. So it is called in vivo measurement. Another one is in vitro measurement. In vivo are made on within the living organism itself. So for example, in vivo ni maksud dia dalam kita buat test ataupun measurement dalam tubuh badan, ataupun contoh macam kita gunakan tikus, kita study wound healing dalam tubuh badan tikus tu, kita buat satu potongan pembedahan kecil, dan kita tengok recovery process. Yang tu dipanggil in vivo measurement. In vitro measurement ni dia di luar tubuh badan, maknanya made outside the body, even though it relates to the function of the body. So measurement of pH of blood sample has been drawn from patient body. So there's two different types of measurement. So you have to remember in vivo. Another one is called in vitro. Right, and then when it comes to the biomedical equipments device, so there are mainly 5 categories that we can classify them. I mean, diagnostic, therapeutic, clinical, laboratory, and also known as research equipment. Moving on, sources of biomedical signal. Biomedical signals are those signals that conveys information, which are used primarily for extracting information on biological system under investigation. So dalam sini we will look at there are few examples. Alright, for example, if I give you a question on sources of a biomedical signal, for example bioelectric signal, bioacoustic signal, I would like you to give the explanation of these types of signals with an example of device or instrument. So you don't just explain the definition of the type of signal, but you give the definition, the explanation, also add with an example device or instrumentation. So let's look at bioelectrical signals. So generated by nerve cells and muscle cells. This is very common, easy. You may know that many equipments are available. One of which is ECG, EEG. Basic source is the cell membrane potential, which under certain condition may be excited to generate an action potential. So kita dah belajar contoh sel jantung kita, macam mana bacaan ECG dapat dirakam. So you have these electrodes, ECG electrodes, 12 electrodes, ECG is been positioned in the human body through the skin. So how actually there is a measurement of the signal. So there is charges of the polarization and depolarization of the cells, of the heart cells. So this is actually being recorded by the ECG signal. Another one to know is bioacoustic signal. Acoustic means sounds. So the measurement of acoustic signals created by many biomedical phenomena and underlying phenomena as well. For example, flow of blood in the heart. Okay, so kita ada alat yang boleh membaca contoh blood flow dalam jantung, heart valves, the flipping of the heart valves, flow of air through the upper and lower airways and in the lungs, which generate typical acoustic signal. So we have the ultrasound based systems that is can measure the blood flow in the heart, and it can also shows you the sounds that travels through the valves, the heart valves, the function of the heart valves, the what we call the strength of the heart valves. You can measure the strength of the heart valves through this the system. Okay, and then biomechanical signals. So from the name we know already is the mechanical types of signals, right? These signals generate from some mechanical function of the biological system, include the types of motion, displacement signal, pressure, flow signals. So what's the example? The movement of the chest wall in accordance with the respiratory activity. So kembang kita punya paru-paru, kan, macam mana dia punya measurement, dia punya bacaan of the displacement. And then biochemical signals. Biochemical signals obtained as a result of chemical measurement from the living tissue. For example, analyzed in the lab. Example, measurement of partial pressure of carbon dioxide, partial pressure of oxygen. So this is called the biochemical signals. And then biomagnetic signals. Biomagnetic signals, extremely weak magnetic fields produced by various organs such as the brain, heart, and lungs. Measurement of these signals provide information which is not available in other types of biosignals such as bioelectric signal. So magnetoencephalograph, this is one type of device. Then biooptical signals. Signals are generated as a result of optical function. So this one I think you have already explored in your some of our other subjects. The biological system occurring either naturally or induced by a measurement process. Blood oxygenation may be estimated by measuring the transmitted backscattered light from a tissue at a different wavelength. So you have this the system called pulse oximetry. Pulse oximetry, you can measure the pulse, the number of pulse in minutes, and then you can measure the blood flow, what we call the saturation of oxygen in the blood. So how enriched is the blood with the oxygen, and this is one example of biooptical signal. So they sometimes use the transmitted or backscattered light from tissue at different wavelengths. So if you use sensors, different sensors, you get the different types of measurement. For example, in the pulse oximetry system, if you want to measure the oxygen saturation, you need to use a different type of optical sensors. For example, infrared types of optical sensors. So if you just want to measure only the pulse, there is nothing to do with the measurement of oxygen saturation inside the blood. So you can use the transmitted light from the tissue, and also using the basic LED optical sensors. So if you use optical sensors like LED, you just get the measurement of pulse. But if you go for oxygen saturation, you need to use infrared type of sensors. And then the last is bioimpedance signals. The impedance of tissue is source of important information concerning its composition, blood distribution, and blood volume. Example, the measurement of galvanic skin resistance. So bioimpedance signal, there are so many other examples as well. So try to find out and also remember each example for each signals. So these are the types of bioimpedance signals. Let's look at basic medical instrumentation system signal. This is the diagram, complete block diagram. So if people ask you how does the medical instrumentation system looks like, so this is what. So measurer means the subject that is in contact with the system that we are actually doing the measurement. And then we have sensors, actuator. So on the way back, sensors. So we have basic or advanced system, that means electronic instrumentation, signal conditioning, signal processing. So this is where you have to identify what's the system being used here, either for signal smoothing, for example using amplifier system, and then you process them, whether you want to convert them into digital signals or something like that, and then output, display, storage, transmission. I mean, how you want the signal to be displayed. Is it in the LCD format, screen interfacing system, so data interfacing, and then you want to storage the measurement in the online system or something else. And then if you notice here, there is a feedback, right? Feedback. For example, after the measurement, so most of the system has this feedback system loop. That means it's going to give the user to identify, for example, if there is anything wrong with the current measurement, or if there is any alarming signals. So this feedback will be useful. So here then you will have again to face with the electronic instrumentation signal conditioning. So sometimes you need an actuator. For example, if you have automated drug release syringe, so you will measure the condition of the body, for example the BP system, or the what we call the glucose level. So and then you will have the automated syringe system working by actuating the sensors and delivering a specific types of drugs or any materials into the human bodies. So this is one complete instrumentation system, right? So measurement is is important because maybe internal measurement, blood pressure, surface ECG, infrared radiation, or derived from tissue sample, blood, or biopsy. Most medical important measurement can be grouped in biopotential pressure, flow dimension, displacement, acceleration, impedance, temperature, chemical concentration. These are all the types of properties or the measurement that's conducted on in the biomedical instrumentation. Okay. When talking about the transducers or sensors, so we know the definition is that it's a device that converts one form of energy to another. Sensor converts a physical measurement to an electrical output. So that means if you measure something from the human body, you need to convert them so that it becomes the electrical output, so that it can be processed. A sensor should respond to the form of energy presented in the measurement, interface with living system, minimize the energy extracted. Example, strain gauge convert displacement to an electric voltage. And then signal conditioning unit, like I told earlier, converts the output of the transducer into an electrical quantity suitable for operation of the display. Signal conditioning usually include functions such as you amplify the signal, filtering, analog or digital, analog to digital, DAC or ADC conversion, signal transmission circuitry. And then display system. Display system is a very important part in a medical measurement system or any system, because you need to provide a visible representation so that people can understand what is the things that we are actually measuring, the quantity, displacement on a scale or chart, recorder on the screen of cathode ray tube or numerical form. And then user control. The output display should conform to the human factors engineering guidelines preferred practice for the design of medical devices. Later on we will look at some important points on this. Auxiliary elements may form of control and feedback, may be required to elicit the measurement, to adjust the sensor, signal conditioner, to direct the flow of output for display, storage or transmission. This is another example for auxiliary elements, right? And then now we will start to look at some important points on to design a medical instrumentation. So if you want to design a medical instrumentation, what are the properties that we should consider? There are a few important ones. So we will look at the general constraint first, and then we will look at some additional constraint. So we know already medical instrument designed to measure various medical and physiological parameters. The principal measurement frequency range for each parameters are major factors that affect the design. So there are two things which is known as measurement range. Another one is frequency range. Generally, measurement range are quite low compared with non-medical parameters. Most signals are in the microvolt range. So when you measure, for example, even the pulse oximetry system, your assignment, when you measure, initial output from the sensors will be in the millivolt, or sometimes down to microvolt. So this is what called the measurement range. Another one is you have to consider the frequency range. Most of the biomedical signal are in the audio frequency range or below. That many signal contain DC and very low frequency components. Besides, there are some additional constraints which needs to be considered while designing a measurement system for medical application. These are the two parts, and then followed by inaccessibility of the signal source. Sometimes you have to look at the variables, alright? The variables, and these variables are inaccessible, must be measured indirectly, or correction must be applied to the data that are affected by the measurement process. So normally you have some sort of variables of signals. That means you can vary the signals that be measured due to the inaccessibility. Sometimes the signals is lost during the measurement, so you need a potentiometer that you can actually adjust so that you get back the signals. Variability of physiological parameters is another one. Variables measured from human body or from animals are seldom deterministic. Most measured quantities varies with time, varying among the patient. Therefore, statistical methods are employed in order to establish a relationship among variables. Sometimes the measurement varies from patient to patient. That means you need a statistical method to what we call match the measurement. Another one is also known as interference among physiological system. Stimulation of one part of a given system generally affects all other parts of the system in some way, because many feedback loops exist among physiological system. So this is also another challenging part. That means you will have interference from other physiological system which is nearby. Transducer interface problem. The problems get compounded while making measurement on the living system, where the physical presence of the transducer may change the reading significantly. That means if you have more than one transducer, sometimes there is transducer interface problems. So you get the mix of the signals that you want to measure, and also some known as unwanted signals. High possibility of artifacts, undesirable signal that is external to the physical variable under measurement. Example of artifacts are 50 Hz electrical interference, crosstalk, noise generated within the measuring subject. But in the designing medical instrumentation system, we are dealing with the human patients, or we call the moving subject. That means sometimes you need to have a system which is really can tolerate these possible artifacts. That means one major cause is due to the movement of the subject. And then safe level of applied energy. Since we are designing instrument to be placed on the human body, that means we need to find out what is the safe energy applied. So for example, you want to use this ultrasonic imaging technique, depends upon applied ultrasound energy to the human body. So what is the safe level? So we cannot simply just apply any transducer on the human body, so that we need to find out first the safe level of energy. Patient safety consideration is at utmost important, and at national and international level have laid down specific guidelines. So we have specific guidelines to provide the safety and effectiveness of the medical device intended for use on human subjects. So in designing instrumentation, biomedical instrumentation, so you need to consider seriously the patient safety consideration, because it deals with the life of human. Reliability aspect. So in many cases, so we have this equipment which are functioning, but in some cases the device become so much unreliable due to the what we call physical abuse or transportation, and so many other movement factors. For example, rigorous usage in the hospital, in the ambulance, exposure to corrosive chemicals. So that means if you design a system, the system should be able to function at the time it is required to be functioning. So in case of life-saving equipment like defibrillators, so the failure to operate or provide desired output can become potential life threat for the patient. So if they are using it in the emergency ward, so suddenly the defibrillators is not working, then it is not a reliable equipment. So we need to design a reliable equipment. For example, contoh bila kita buat project dah siap, hari ni function ok, besok kita bawa ke UTHM, kita demo, besok dah tak function, due to the movement in the car. So your the shaking, and then you know how you set up in a different environment. For example, you've been testing the equipment in your hostels, which the room there is no much lights, but when you come to the UTHM, it's an open area, so you have much more lights, so it is actually interference with the sensors, with the system, so that the system become not reliable. So you have to have this in your mind when you do this design. Human factor consideration is a result of the increasing complexity of medical device. The demands of physician and paramedical staff using the equipment have continued to grow. So that means people develop new medical device, sophisticated device, but sometimes you need to know that the people who use the system, they don't have much technical knowledge. So what they want to use is a user-friendly system, so that you need to have a minimum. Even with the minimum knowledge, you can still operate the system, for example. So this is where they call man-machine interaction. There is a lack of man-machine interaction. Why? Because if the system become too complex and complicated, then people need complex knowledge as well to operate the system. Okay, next is feasibility analysis. In medical instrumentation design, at early stage, best idea is often not appreciated until at least a preliminary feasibility analysis. That means when you design a system, then you need to show at the early stage that this system is somehow working and functioning, and there is what we call a demand for designing the system. So you need to have preliminary findings, so they call it feasibility analysis. Feasibility analysis and written product description. So that means what is the product is actually for, and should consider the medical needs, technical feasibility, and how well the company's current or planned product kind, and safe methods. Medical feasibility entails examining clinical need for the product, if the system needs a clinical what we call examination, review, patient indication. So these are the points that you should include. Patient indication, number of patients, so how many patients, clinical specialties, exactly how, why, by whom the device will be utilized. Technical feasibilities analysis include description of the core technologies needed. That means if you buy the system, if the user buy the system, then what are the technologies needed? So basically what you need to be integrated with the system. Suitability of existing or readily modifiable components, breakthrough or inventions required, system analysis, and preliminary cost estimate. So when you design, also people will ask you what is the cost estimate for the design. So you should be able to advise your superior on the design, the costing. Now, talking about design criteria, there are few factors that impose constraint on the design, and of course different for each type of instrument. Some of the general requirements can be categorized as signal, environmental, medical, and economic factors. So this we later look at this figure, how these factors are incorporated into the initial design and economic in design and development of an instrument. Actual exits on prototypes are always needed before final design decision can be made. Changes in performance and interaction of the elements in a complex instrument often dictate design modification. Right? Good designs are frequently the result of many compromises throughout the development of the instrument. So let's look at this. This is the figure. Right. So the flow is manufacturable prototype. Prototype means your current design, right? So this is what you can manufacture, and then through prototype, clinical trials, right? final design review, engineering change order. So in the manufacturable prototype, you have CAD, computer aided diagram, circuit diagram, software requirement, and then true prototype used by the test engineers, design assurance engineers, manufacturing, tested on animals, humans. That means this is where you will acquire the preliminary feasibility analysis data. And then clinical trials, observation of users, discover design flows, so whether there is any need for changes on the designs. Okay. In final design review, test result feedback. So you will receive assessment of manufacturability, detailed cost estimates, avoid redesign of manufacturability. And then last but not least, this engineering change order will come. This one is actually according to the current demand. So that means if you design the system on the year 2020, so by year 2025, will you be still doing the same design again? So do you need to do some changes on the design? So this depends on the current market and also the demand of the new technologies, for example. So you need to consider many other factors. But this is what they call design process for medical instrument, where choice and design of instrument are affected by signals and also by environment. So commercial medical instrumentation development process. So how people actually they generate the idea. So how they actually generate the idea. Ideas often come from people working where healthcare is delivered, because clinical needs are most evident there. Physicians, nurses, clinical engineers, sales personnel are good resources of ideas. So that means if you go and see the physician, nurses, clinical engineers, sales personnel, that you sit down with them, discuss with them, so you will know potentially you will trigger one or two ideas on how to do to develop new instrumentation, medical instrumentation. Industry engineers and marketing person should spend time in the hospital. So dia kata apa, sebab kena banyak duduk di hospital. That's where the place you will acquire the real problem, the true problem. So sometimes we do a certain design, but the design of the project must solve some problems. So if it's not solving a problem, then what's the purpose of redesigning the system? So this is what they call, you have to go and explore the place. For example, you want to do medical instrumentation. So where medical will be appreciated, it will be appreciated mainly in the hospital, in the industry. So you have to go to that place, talk with the specific related person, and then you will generate few ideas according to the current problems. And then manufacturing feasibility analysis, here they listed like 8 of them. Financial aspect, personal requirements, competition, patterns, standards, manufacturing requirements, sales and service equipment, time schedule for the project. So let's take one or two example. Patents, let's say patents. So if you want the ideas, if you know that the design is actually will be useful and is serious design, and it could be marketed, so then you need to go for the patent. So if the patent process is completed, then you are free to what we call to design the system, to manufacture the system, and potentially also sell the product that you design. And then you need to also consider the manufacturing requirements, sales and service equipment. That means after sales. So once you have designed the system, you have sold the system, then will there be any service for the equipment? So how much service should be done? How yearly service, or quarterly service should be done. Time schedule for the project. Experience has shown that abbreviating the feasibility phase or adding features after this phase usually cause disaster. Detailed feasibility review should be required at the end of this phase. That means pada proses ni, dalam dalam proses production ni, kita kena buat analisis feasibility itu sebelum, then we need to find out in the early stages where the feasibility analysis. So by adding something at the between is going to cost much. Itu maksud dia. Maknanya kita kena ubah banyak perkara, banyak points perlu diubah. Jadi kita tak digalakkan untuk adding after you have done the complete process of production. And then product specification. So in this part, if you have done a favorable feasibility review, and complete detailed product specification must be written to describe the product. Of course, bila orang nak beli alat, dia mesti nak tahu spec. Semua orang katanya apa specification alat ni. So what's the strength and what we call the power of the system. So you need to have everything, numerical values for performance, costing requirement, user interface requirement, size, color, weight of the instrument. Okay. So ini semua yang basic. Maknanya kalau kita beli komputer pun, kita tanya apa spec dia, berapa speed dia, berapa dia punya what we call internet speed, dia punya processing, hard disk. So macam itulah, kita perlu ada dia punya product specification. So siapa yang guna product specification ni? Product specification used by R&D engineers, test equipment, design engineers, quality assurance engineers, manufacturing engineers throughout the product life cycle. Maknanya sampai bila-bila. Sampailah dia kata apa, alat medical ni dia tak diproduce, it's not produced in high volume because what, so full automation of production not cost effective. Jadi kemungkinan dia mengikut demand. Kalau banyak yang diperlukan, barulah boleh gunakan full automation. Eco keep coming during full production. Maknanya environmental change order tadi, kalau ada yang report yang masuk, maknanya during production kita kena betulkan. Any failures of medical device must be documented along with the corrective action taken. So ini for the record. You need to have a clean record of production. At the same time, when there is a eco engineering change order, ECO, so you need to do that, fulfill that demand. Okay. Generalized instrument specification, ini kita dah tengok tadi. Some of extra information, measurement, physical quantity, property. So input and sensor specification, biasanya orang tulis macam ni, input and sensor specification, measurement, differential or absolute, input common mode rejection. So these are all the technical terms that is written on the specs. Operating range, overload range, overload recovery time, sensitivity, input impedance, sensor principle, transient response time, frequency response, modulating sensor excitation, isolation, physical, and also special handling. And then another points that they focus is also on the signal processing specification, output specification. So you need to know the output specification, output quantity, range, power, impedance, writing speed, timing, and also interfacing. So the types of digital interfacing capabilities. And then errors and reliabilities. Overall accuracy, the maximal difference between measuring quantity and the true quantity without regard to the source of error. So these are all the issues that should be focused. Repeatability, that means if you do the measurement, if you do the repeat measurement, is it still reliable? So can you still repeat? Non-linearity, interfering signal, susceptibility, noise, signal to noise ratio, stability, storage life, reliability, and so many others. So physical and miscellaneous specification, any small, just basic, right? What are the technicals that been focused? Okay, same here as well. Consumables, delivery, warranties, and all these are the specs that should be included in the product specification, and also the technical constraint. Right. Ending the lecture. So this one is types of medical instrument. So these are the what we call types of instrument that is focused in this subject: measurement instrument, monitoring, diagnosis, therapy, surgery, and laboratory instrument. Right. The device that is used, measurement means, so device used for measurement certain physical quantity. Example, thermometer, spiral manometer, electroencephalogram, EEG, electrocardiography. So this one is considered as the measurement. Complex instrument that requires memory. Why? Because it's monitoring. Monitoring means that we will do the monitoring for the patient maybe in hours time or in days time. Example, recorders with strips of papers, oscilloscope, computers, that the same data in memory to be used later, so that you can always come back to re-evaluate the data. So this is the type called monitoring instrument. Diagnosis instrument, function that made up of alarm which give warning when beat more than that the limit. This one is straightforward. Therapy instrument involves feedback of a signal or pressure to the biological system. Therapy that allow the leg to heal by not allowing the legs to move. Auditory therapy equipment, ultrasonic massager, which is operated by the therapist physician. And then we have surgery instrument, cutting of tissue, ESU knives, hypodermic needles, diatomy, and lasers. Contoh masa buat pembedahan tu kita ada pisau elektrik kan, yang boleh memotong, lepas tu boleh matikan kebocoran darah. So these are the surgery instrument. And then last but not least, the laboratory instrument. Obtain substance, the liquid, the biosystem and tissue, measurement of pH, check the particles in the fluid. So banyak lah. Ini memang kita guna macam-macam, electrolyte analyzer, flame photometer, spectrometry. So nak dapatkan detail pada biosystem ataupun tissue. So that's it. So we will stop here, and the next lecture we will continue with the cell culture. So see you inshallah in the next lesson. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.